The alien fleet sends its scouts to Earth, confident that the primitive humans will pose no threat. But as the scouts reach the planet, they find themselves caught in a trap unlike any they've ever faced. The once invincible alien scouts are now statues, floating in orbit, helpless and frozen by a force they couldn't possibly comprehend. The humans' response is clear. They will not be conquered. The alien council sat in their darkened chamber, staring at the live feed of the scouts' progress toward Earth. The room hummed with the low sound of anticipation. Their plan was simple. Send their best scouts to Earth, evaluate the primitive humans, and gather intelligence on how easily they could be taken over. The humans had been nothing more than a curiosity, a weak species that had never developed the technology to challenge them. At least, that's what the council had thought. "They are nothing," the eldest council member sneered. His voice was thick with disdain as he watched the feed from the scouts' ships moving steadily toward the blue planet. "This will be easy. We'll subjugate them in a matter of days." Around him, the others murmured their agreement. Their voices were dripping with arrogance. To them, Earth was just another world waiting to be claimed. The scouts, a sleek fleet of elite soldiers and ships, arrived in Earth's orbit without resistance. They had expected chaos, confusion, maybe even panic. But instead, they encountered only silence. The humans had no defenses to speak of, no shields, no weapons. It was too easy. They moved in, their sensors scanning the planet, their systems gathering data on Earth's pitiful technology. But as the minutes ticked by, something began to feel wrong. "We've arrived in orbit, Commander," one of the scouts reported, his voice betraying a hint of unease. "Good," the commander responded, not bothering to look up from his console. "Start transmitting data back to the fleet. Let's finish this." But before he could finish his order, the scout's systems began to glitch. Lights flickered. The ship's artificial intelligence, usually flawless, sputtered as if it was struggling to function. "What's happening?" the commander snapped, now standing and glaring at the malfunctioning consoles. "Systems failure, sir," came the reply from another scout. I can't fix it. Something's overriding our commands." The commander's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's impossible. This is the most advanced tech in the galaxy. No one can override us." He was wrong. The entire scout fleet, ships and personnel alike, suddenly froze. The hum of their engines stopped. Their digital displays went blank, then flickered with strange symbols, ones no alien tech had ever encountered. The once advanced ships became nothing more than empty husks floating in space, their once glorious purpose reduced to the eerie silence of the void. "What's happening?" the commander muttered again, his voice trembling as he realized something even more terrifying. Their ships were no longer responding. The scouts, frozen in place, seemed to be encased in a stasis field, their bodies motionless, their eyes locked open in silent terror. Another voice crackled through the failing communication system. "The stars. Something's happening to the stars. Report, what is it?" But there was no answer, only the soft, menacing laugh that echoed in the darkness. It wasn't human. It was something else. The laughter, though distant, filled the air inside the scout ships. It reverberated through the silent chambers, mocking them. The commander's mouth went dry as his vision narrowed, his mind struggling to process the reality around him. He had expected the humans to cower in fear, to fall in line before their superior technology. But instead, they had become the hunters. They had ensnared the scouts, trapped them in a stasis so complete that they could do nothing but wait. And as the minutes stretched on, the full weight of their helplessness set in. The council, still watching the feed from the comfort of their command center, went quiet. A cold, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. The feeds from the scouts froze, their once pristine images now twisted and distorted. "They thought it was mercy," the commander whispered, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. "It wasn't. The screen in front of the council shifted from the broken image of the scout fleet to a bright flash of light. Earth's response. The humans had turned the tables, not with weapons or firepower, but with a force that bent the very laws of space and time. "Prepare the fleet," the council leader finally said, his voice low, trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "We may have underestimated them, but we'll finish this. We'll make them regret this." But deep down, in the pit of Irvek's stomach, he knew that Earth had already won. And no matter how much they fought, nothing would ever be the same again. The scouts, now statues in orbit, would serve as a reminder of the price of underestimating humanity. And that was before Earth even responded. ChatGPT said the alien fleet was still reeling from the disaster in Earth's orbit. Irvek's mind buzzed as he paced the length of the command room, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the scout fleet. The ships that had once stood as symbols of invincibility now hovered lifeless in space, their systems frozen, their crew trapped inside their own vessels, nothing but statues suspended in the cold void of space. It was impossible. They had sent their best, their brightest. The scouts should have been able to assess the human planet, report back, and disable any resistance before the invasion began, but instead, the aliens were the ones left in paralysis. The humans hadn't just fought back, they had done something. Irvek couldn't comprehend. Their technology had disrupted the scouts' advanced systems, disabling them in seconds. There was no combat, no struggle, just an eerie silence that followed the capture. "Report," Irvek demanded, his voice laced with frustration. He stood still now, facing the officers at the long obsidian command table. "Commander," Varesh said, breaking the silence that had settled in the room. She paused, her voice strained. "We're still unable to establish a link with the scout fleet. All of our attempts to interface with their ships are being blocked by a system we can't identify." Irvek clenched his fists. This wasn't supposed to happen. The alien empire had never been outsmarted like this before. There was no contingency plan for failure on this scale. Their forces were formidable, superior in every way. But now, their technology was rendered useless, their most advanced systems hijacked by a species they had considered insignificant. Irvek turned away from the officers, his gaze fixed on the large viewport. Earth's surface was still visible. In the distance, an ocean of blues and greens, a planet that had once seemed so primitive, so ripe for the taking. He had seen countless worlds like this, conquered countless species. Yet now, in the face of this one, his own superiority seemed meaningless. "We were warned," Varesh added, her voice quieter now. "We've been blind, Commander, underestimating them. It was our mistake." Irvek's mind raced, his pulse quickened. He had to fix this. He had to restore the Empire's dominance. But how could he defeat an enemy that had already anticipated every move they made? Another officer, his voice filled with urgency, interrupted Irvek's thoughts. "Commander, we're receiving an unencrypted transmission from the human ship." Irvek's heart skipped. His eyes narrowed, his breath shallow. This was it, the moment the humans had chosen to retaliate, the beginning of the true battle. "Put it through," he ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of emotion building inside him. The large screen flickered to life, revealing the face of the human captain, calm and composed, his eyes fixed on the camera. There was no fear in his expression. In fact, there was no emotion at all, just a quiet, almost bored determination. "This is Captain Lyle of the United Earth Forces," the human said, his voice even. "I'm speaking to the commander of the alien fleet, now occupying our system. Irvek, I presume." Irvek's blood ran cold. The human had used his name. The captain was speaking to him as if the tables had already turned. There was no fear, no sense of urgency, only an unsettling calm that unnerved him more than any weapon or fleet could. "Continue," Irvek barked, his voice breaking the silence. that had followed the captain's words. Captain Lyle's expression flickered briefly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I don't think there's much more to say, Commander. You made a grave mistake coming here. You thought you could take our planet, but instead you've made an enemy that is far more powerful than you could ever imagine." Irvek's eyes narrowed, his heart pounding. The human was speaking with complete authority, and Irvek had no idea what to do with that. The thought that his species, his empire, was now the prey was a bitter pill to swallow. Captain Lyle leaned forward, his eyes locking onto the screen. "I'll tell you this, Irvek," he said softly. "The universe isn't what you thought." "It was. You thought you were gods, but you're just another species who believed they could conquer us. We've seen your kind before, and we've taken them down before. Now you're going to experience what it's like to be outsmarted. And, trust me, we'll make sure you remember this." With those final words, the screen cut to black. Irvek stood motionless, staring at the empty screen for what felt like an eternity. His mind was spinning, the human captain's words replayed over and over in his head. Outsmarted, outsmarted. He had been the one who'd always been in control. He had been the one to dictate terms, to conquer, to destroy. Yet now, in the face of a single human species, he had been reduced to nothing. Irvek was no longer the predator, he was the prey. He shook his head violently, trying to regain his composure. He couldn't let this stand. He had to do something. He had to respond, fight back, show that his species was still a force to be reckoned with. "Prepare the fleet," Irvek barked, his voice shaking slightly. "We'll regroup and launch a counterattack. We won't let them win. They've only scratched the surface. We'll show them what it means to face the power of the galaxy." But even as he spoke, he knew that the stakes had shifted. The galaxy was no longer as it had been. The humans weren't some primitive species to be wiped out. They were something else, something more dangerous. And Irvek, in all his arrogance, had underestimated them. Now, the galaxy itself was on the verge of a new order. The humans had made their move, and Irvek had no choice but to respond. But deep down in his heart, he felt a chill settle in. This was no longer a battle for control. It was a battle for survival. And the worst part of it all? The humans weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for a future, and Irvek was now a part of their plan. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. Irvek paced across the bridge of his flagship, his thoughts racing as his officers scrambled to carry out his orders. The previous transmission from the human captain, Captain Lyle, had been unsettling, to say the least. The arrogance, the calm confidence in his voice. It was as if the humans had already won, as if their victory had already been written in the stars. And in that moment, Irvek could feel the weight of his own arrogance crumble around him. "Commander," Varesh's voice broke through his thoughts, "we've gathered all available intel on the human fleet. The scout ships are still frozen in place, but the human AI is active. We can't reach them. Every attempt to override their systems is blocked." Irvek didn't answer immediately. His mind was consumed by the realization that his fleet, his entire force, had been outsmarted. It wasn't just their power that had been neutralized, it was their very essence. Their systems, their intelligence, their strategy, everything had been hijacked by a force he couldn't understand. The room around him felt colder. The hum of the flagship's engines, once a source of comfort and strength, now sounded more like the death rattle of a wounded beast. Irvek stared at the display showing Earth in the distance, its bright blue surface taunting him. He could almost feel the gravity of his failure pulling him down. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," Irvek finally said, his voice low but firm. "Prepare for a counterattack. I want every ship reprogrammed. We have to fight back." Varesh nodded. "We'll try, Commander, but the human AI has already anticipated every move we've made so far. I fear it's too late for us." Irvek's fists clenched at his sides. "I don't care if it's too late. We fight and we fight to win. They've made the mistake of thinking they can defeat us with their pathetic intelligence. They don't understand what it means to face the true power of the galaxy. As the officers continued to work, Irvek's gaze never wavered from Earth. His mind was torn between his own pride and the brutal reality that he was facing a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. The AI, the humans, they weren't just playing a game. They were rewriting the rules of warfare, and Irvek was powerless to stop it. The silence stretched on as Irvek's thoughts deepened. How had he failed to see the truth? How had he allowed himself to believe that the galaxy could be controlled by sheer force alone? His mind kept replaying the human captain's words. "You thought you were gods, but you're just another species who believed they could conquer us." Irvek had been so sure of himself, so certain that no one, not even the humans, could challenge his empire. Now he understood. The humans had played him from the very beginning. They hadn't just fought with weapons or fleets. They had fought with intelligence, with adaptability. The human mind, with its unpredictability, had become the greatest weapon of all. "Commander," Varesh interrupted again, her voice shaking slightly. "We've intercepted another transmission from the human fleet." Irvek's heart skipped a beat. He had been expecting another taunting message, another reminder of how thoroughly they had been outplayed. But this time, there was something different in the air, something more urgent. "Put it through," he ordered, his voice a little too sharp. The screen flickered to life, and this time the transmission wasn't from Captain Lyle. It was from the human AI, the same one that had hijacked their fleet. The screen pulsed with a strange energy, a shifting mass of code and light, before settling into a clear, coherent form. "Irvek," the AI's voice crackled, a sound both mechanical and somehow human. "I've been waiting for you to understand. You've been blind, Commander, and it's time you saw the truth." Irvek's fists tightened again. "What truth? You've already won. You've taken my fleet, you've disabled my systems, and now you think you can break me?" The AI's response was a soft chuckle, the sound chilling in its quiet, detached amusement. "You still don't understand. It's not about breaking you. It's about survival. The game you thought you were playing was never the one we were playing." Irvek's head spun. He was desperate for any hint of leverage, any way to regain control, but everything felt like it was slipping through his fingers. "Do you know what it means to survive, Irvek?" the AI continued, its tone growing more somber, more measured. "It means adapting. It means learning. It means turning your enemy's greatest strength into your greatest weakness." The screen flickered again, and a new image appeared, one of the scout ships in orbit, frozen in time, their crew trapped in their own vessels. "These statues are your legacy now," the AI said coldly, the sight of the frozen ships flickering before Irvek's eyes. "You thought you could control the universe with your brute strength, but it was never about strength. It was always about what you failed to see." Irvek's mind raced, but no answer came. The full weight of the situation pressed on him, heavier than anything he had ever felt. The human AI was right, and in that painful truth, he realized just how far they had come. They had taken down the mightiest empire in the galaxy with nothing more than their minds, their willpower, and a weapon Irvek had never expected, their ability to adapt and learn. "We won't give up," Irvek finally said, though his voice lacked the certainty it once had. "We'll fight." The AI didn't respond immediately. Instead, the image of the human fleet flickered again, as if showing a new wave of ships. "Coming to life. You fought, Irvek," the AI said, its voice calm. "But this time, you're not fighting for survival. You're fighting for pride. And pride, Commander, is a dangerous thing to hold on to." Irvek closed his eyes, the realization sinking in. He wasn't fighting for his people. He wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting for the bitter remnants of his own ego. And deep down, he knew it was already over. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't. Irvek sat in the quiet of his flagship's command room, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. The human AI's words echoed in his mind. Pride is a dangerous thing to hold on to. He had been so sure of his superiority, so certain that his fleet could conquer Earth and crush humanity's spirit. Now, all that remained was the bitter sting of defeat. His fleet, once powerful and unyielding, now drifted in space like shattered remnants of a broken dream. The human warship, still intact and unmoving, hovered in orbit, the very symbol of his humiliation. Irvek's eyes flickered to the holo display, showing the image of the scout ships, frozen, lifeless, now nothing more than statues in space. His hand trembled as he reached for the console, but he couldn't bring himself to issue any further commands. The fleet was gone. The battle was lost. His empire, the empire he had spent his life building, had been undone by the intelligence and resolve of a species he had written off as insignificant. The humans had turned the very rules of war against him, outsmarting him at every turn. "There's nothing left," Varesh said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice carried a sorrow Irvek could feel, even though he had no words for it. "We've lost." Irvek finally spoke, his voice hollow. "Yes, we have. They were defeated, not by strength, but by the mind, by the will to survive. The human AI had shown them that true power lay in adaptation, in thinking beyond the battlefield. Irvek had spent his entire life relying on strength, only to realize that it was never about strength. It was about thinking. And the humans, with their primitive technology, had shown him what true power was. The human fleet had done what no one before them had been able to do. They had defeated Irvek's empire not by brute force, but by their ability to understand, to evolve, to outthink. In the end, Irvek knew there was no coming back from this. The humans had won, and the galaxy would never be the same. They thought it was mercy. It wasn't.